Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our podcast, Remotely Speaking. We're really excited about this first session, especially as we have the brilliant Jeremy Blain with us, business and digital transformation specialist and guru. So in our first session, we're going to be talking about how companies can better embrace a digital culture and how a digital culture helps to enhance remote work and blended working. So Jeremy is here to tell us all about that. And also he'll share his funny stories and experiences along the way. So let's get right into it. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. This is brilliant to have you as our first guest as well. It feels like quite an honor.
Well, the pressure's on, isn't it, actually, for your first guest. Thanks very much for having me. Great to be here, Rochelle.
Yeah, excellent. So can you tell us a bit about your background and also about your working model?
Yes, well, I've had a number of roles in my career. I started in sales, moved into marketing, operations management, then general management, and since about 2003 have been largely international in my working, even though I was based in certain areas.
Yeah.
So I lived in the UK, but traveled to most major markets in the world. Where I was setting up new businesses or business models like channel distributors, for example. And then in 2011, moved to Singapore in my previous company to set up the brand new operation for Asia Pacific, which spanned India to the Pacific, which is not an insignificant territory.
Wow.
So even as far as back then and into the early part of this century, remote working was what I did. It was an airport here, a hotel there, whatever. And as new technologies came on board, I was very eager to adopt them to make my life easier. So that was really helpful. But what it's meant in my own business now, I've moved back to the UK, but I can be truly global. And because I developed a network along the way, my business model and, my essentially remote business model now is a business which is based on 100% contingent workers. Experts that I've met all over the world that fulfill the internal things that I need to do, but also deliver the services to my customers.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I've spoken to a lot of people that have asked me if a contingent model of business can work, which at the time I was quite surprised by because this is natural to us. You have Performance Works International, and that's fully contingent. Crowd Potential, my company, is also fully contingent. So this is the new normal, but for some it's still a question mark. And with reason as well, because there are some challenges around that in itself, but not challenges that can't be overcome. So, in this season, I don't know if to call it a season, these times, let's put it that way, that there have been certain drivers of remote working, particularly COVID-19 and the pandemic. What does this really mean for businesses that are now seeking to transform digitally? What other drivers might there be? And do you see remote working and this contingent and digital transformation process as here to stay?
Well, we're in the so-called VUCA world, aren't we? The volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And I've added a D onto that now. I call it VUCAD, which is distributed or dispersed, however you want to call it, because it really is moving into the way. But it really is just one component of what I call a perfect storm as we've headed into the 2020s. Just 24 weeks ago, before the pandemic hit, we were already pressured in business around transformation. It was digital, it was workforce transformation, ways of working, new business models, hyper competition in many industries and marketplaces. So many businesses were all challenged because they were behind the curve on transformation anyway. We've just come off the back of a global financial crisis. Many organizations were struggling to just keep up with short-term volumes and revenues that they needed to do. And we were at a point in history at 2019 where the failure rate of businesses was its highest in history. So the S&P 500, for example, let's take that as an example. In the 1920s, the failure rate approximately was about 67 years. By the end of 2019, it was 15 years. Post-pandemic, it's predicted to be 8 years.
Yeah, it's amazing how the rapidness of the change is head spinning, really, when you think about it. So a lot of companies are really, for them, this is really a first time thing. And I know very much with my own background, I'm from Barbados, and within the Caribbean setting where remote working was not the mainstream and not the norm. I remember when we spoke about this, I spoke about this at a conference last year, there was a lot of pushback. But now companies have found themselves being thrown into remote work in order to maintain their survival and livelihood. So now this, as you said, that VUCA, this is the new normal. So what would you say to a company that is trying to transform their business and to embrace a digital culture? Where should that company start?
Well, where they will have started 24 weeks ago, let's say, pre-pandemic, was they would have been talking about digital transformation. But even then, I was arguing that that's a defunct piece of jargon these days. It's not digital transformation. Those companies that have done it successfully know that it's far more than that. It is whole business model transformation.
Absolutely.
You've got the digital alongside the human, the cultural elements, the customer, the data protection and the cyber security, which is becoming it. And then how then you protect your own future as well and start to use predictive analytics to look ahead, to prescribe your own future. So there's many components which are in place. So rather than going away and being one component, it's now become urgent and important for organizations as they went into the pandemic actually to transform this way. So many have been forced to. In fact, pre-pandemic, according to smallbusinessgenius.com, a research they did at the end of last year, 44% of global companies did not even allow remote working. 3 weeks after that research, 80% of them were scrabbling to digitalize so that they could actually do it in a way. So this started the process. So the argument now is use the opportunity to explore possibilities, look forward, and not in your mind think, oh, I can't wait to go back to what was normal. It's actually, we should be looking forward to what could be now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've heard a lot of companies saying that as well, saying, I can't wait to get back to normal. And there are even cases where I was speaking to a colleague in Barbados where they were saying that companies are now encouraging them, okay, the worst is past, and their company is saying, okay, let's get everyone back in the office. But there are many of the employees who don't want to return. They like the new way of working. It works better. It's more productive for them. Not to say that remote working will suit everyone, but there is a pushback from these employees of that eagerness to return to normal. Normal is now past tense, and I think that really needs to be maintained. So then in that business transformation process, what would you say to, let's say, senior executives and managers? Where do they start in terms of enabling their workforce and enabling their employees to actually think differently and to undertake this process?
Well, it's a really good question. And I did a piece of research last year on the state of digital transformation across 3 continents. And the picture was not great. And in fact, some of the most alarming data that came out of it was the unreadiness of leadership in mindset, but also in terms of capabilities, because it's a brand new transformation. So what came out of that research was, and I did it with another partner, and we realized that actually there's very few models in the world that actually help organizations through so-called transformation and at that point digital transformation, mainly because it was focused on a very narrow aspect. So when we started considering this whole business transformation, we realized that there were 3 distinct phases of transformation, and we built what's called a ticking clock, we called it, actually based on the doomsday clock, and it's 2 minutes to midnight before you fail, before your transformation. The 3 components though are about future thinking. So that's about envisioning what it is. So it's not a digital strategy, which is what many organizations are moving into. It is a strategy for a digital world, because it's not just about digital. Then within that component, it's in the leadership mindset. So the mindset about, what does that mean? Am I ready? What help do we need at leadership level? And then how do we move to execution? Because the execution phase, according to IBM and Forbes that have done a lot of research on this, can fail over 80% of the times. 8 out of 10 transformations are failing.
Yeah.
So if you
That's
get that right, first of all, you come into this middle component, which is centricity, which is thinking about the culture, your people, and your customers, and
yeah.
then moving around into being more future ready, which is around the predictive analytics that allows you to prescribe your future.
Absolutely.
So we talk about this as a journey, not one element, but it has to start with a vision for a digital world and getting the leadership mindset right.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I've seen your model, and that's brilliant. I would recommend it for any business. In terms of that readiness as well, you often have this pushback against disrupting the traditional, I guess we can call it. There are some that still cling to that traditional model, I guess, because it presents that comfort and safety of what you've always known. But within the current context, it's not going to work. But you make a really important point there as well, in that a lot of companies are putting the digital first, and it's not really about the digital. It's the digital is a means to an end, is to facilitate the end goal. And where we get caught up in the tools and the let's say how to use Teams, how to use Slack, we forget the overall business vision, what these things are actually supposed to be driving. So I think that's particularly important. Can you give us an example from your experience of a company that has done really well in terms of their digital transformation journey, or business transformation, I should say?
Yeah, there's a couple actually. There's one I'll come to in a little bit, which is around culture, but around specifically what you're talking about there. it the companies that are succeeding know the difference between thinking digital transformation is about a piece of technology
Yeah,
versus it's much bigger than that.
absolutely. Yeah.
And as far back as 2012, Domino's Pizzas were really evolving this as a rather traditional
That's a good
company.
example.
They
Yeah.
responded very early and successfully by looking at the whole technology architecture. And what they realized is that they had, as you rightly said there, they had so many individual tools and systems which worked independently for the function here, the finance function there, or marketing, or whatever it was here, and they weren't talking together, they weren't connected.
Yeah.
They had to use API technologies to make data kind of come together, but there was no ecosystem. So therefore, in 2012, their enlightened leadership
Mm.
digitally redesigned and rebuilt its products, operations, culture, technology, and in fact,
Yeah.
the first pizza chain to debut online pizza tracking
Yeah.
and voice ordering app. You know, they were really ahead of the game. I mean, this is 2012, and it enabled ordering from multiple platforms, very much aligned from a customer-centric point of view. So
Yeah.
the whole point about their technology architecture and their transformation was thinking about how do we make the lives of our customers easier and our employers easier. It wasn't about the technology that makes the difference. It's about what is the need and what fits in.
Yes.
And, you know, its stock price at the time, you know, remember before pre-2012, Domino's was actually close to chapter 11.
Yes, they were.
And they had to really turn it round. If you'd
Yeah.
have bought $100 worth of stock, you know, in Domino's, in you know, at the same time as you might have bought Google, Domino's would have given you more return.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, based on what they're
Yeah.
doing. So that's a really good example of transcending transformation by just considering technology, by
Yeah.
looking at actually how does our whole business evolve, an ecosystem that supports what we do internally and with our customers.
Yeah, it's really a big picture view. And I can think of another company as well, DBS, a Singaporean company, but based all over Asia, where their focus was in their banking transaction. They thought to themselves, you know what, or how they explained it, they said, no one wakes up thinking, well, let's go to the bank. That's my thing to do today. We go to the bank for the resources that we need, and we need those resources so we can live our lives. So when they started thinking about the end goal, their mission became to make their presence in your life as minimal as possible, so that banking is no longer an inconvenience. It's no longer an errand, but it's something you hardly think about that gets you to your other goal. And in that vision, they were able to create a very digital operation, a digital bank that really enhances the customer experience. So you're very much right with that big picture view.
Oh yeah, and in fact, DBS is a great example because their whole their whole philosophy was making banking invisible and joyful, and
Absolutely.
that drove their whole business transformation. But it was exactly as I described it before. It was actually driven by an enlightened leader, their CEO Piyush
Yes.
Gupta, who held his hand up and said, "We and I, as the leadership team, we do not know digital.
Yeah.
We need to know it. We need to understand what our customers need." And in fact, as they went through the process, they went through really tough hackathons at senior management level.
Yeah.
They really experienced this. And what they realized as they went through the transformation, it started to create new opportunities for products and
Yeah.
services they hadn't even thought of yet, because they didn't have
Yeah.
the platforms to do it.
Yeah.
So it's actually changed everything internally in terms of an
Yeah.
attitude, at
Yeah.
leadership level, but also employee level,
Yeah.
around how digital can create an even closer human to human contact, which is a really important point for the digital era.
Absolutely. It's a real sort of agile and design thinking mindset that's really going to bring that innovation and that different thinking around. Now that you mentioned in terms of making the bank invisible, it kind of reminds me also, when we go back to remote working, of that invisible workforce. And I know a lot of companies particularly are struggling with the concept of, well, how do we manage that invisible workforce? We can no longer see our employees. How do we make sure that they're doing what we're doing? And particularly when you add your independent workers into the mix, it becomes more complicated. You might be working with a person thousands of miles away that is not a part of your company, that you have no physical contact with, but that might have access to your company information and might need to work with your colleagues as well. So in that vein, what do you suggest for companies? Where does digital transformation come in that process, our business transformation? And what is the role of, let's say, HR senior managers in really engaging that invisible workforce?
Well, it's quite interesting this, because we did a piece of research, didn't we, at
Yeah.
the beginning of this year, called the blended workforce revolution, whereby we tried to show to organizations that something that many had informally in their mind, i.e. use of managed services, use of independent resource to do project work,
Yeah.
was actually a major trend. In fact, the biggest human capital trend in a generation to hit our workforce, which again is being accelerated by the pandemic. Like many of these transformations are being accelerated. So what we're seeing is, as some organizations are already downsizing, you're getting more people coming into independent work because they're using it as an opportunity to set up themselves, but also making that decision independently because they can see how their expertise can be very valuable for organizations. And perhaps even at their level, those organizations might not be able to afford them as a permanent resource anymore.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's no accident that we found in our research, Rochelle, that in the last 2 years, the biggest population moving towards independent workers were Generation X.
Yeah.
Often seen as a very capable generation, the glue between the boomers and the millennials, and the leaders in waiting in many organizations. But many of them have actually voted with their feet, saying, we're not taking over this mess, thank you very much.
Yes.
But you can hire us a consultant to come in and do it. He said, having done this himself. So you've got that happening. So therefore, there is a real call and a need for a brand new human capital manifesto that you and I call Gig HR, which is a framework that looks at the workforce, no matter whether they're permanent, part-time or independent, and starts to think about how do we need to work differently with our workforce and get value out of our workforce and add value to our workforce, whoever they are, wherever they are, because they may be also increasingly dispersed. Some may be more digitally orientated than others. So there's lots of different things in place. And we have to get new rules of the road. We've got to get the technology ecosystems that glue all that together. You've got to get the upskilling going on. That how do we do this potentially in a more collaborative, dispersed way? But how do we keep everybody motivated, engaged, and recognized for great work within this environment? Because it's certainly not happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. You have pockets of excellence where you see companies providing one or two best practice examples, but in terms of the mainstream, it's really, there's still a long way to go. A lot of companies are still managing with that, as you like to put it, the 20th century thinking rather than that 21st century thinking. So a lot of our HR models and management systems we know would have been designed for a more stable environment where you're used to a 9-to-5 full-time employee, but now where companies are grappling with, well, how do you manage a person thousands of miles away who might have, let's say, different tax regulations in their region and so forth? How do we actually engage that process? So it definitely is a real challenge for businesses now. And we would,
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
oh no, sorry. I was going to say, because
Yeah.
you know, I was going to talk about you then, because I see you as a real expert in this area. You know, at country level, it's not just organisations. It's country level. How do economies not just attract companies, but how do they attract digital workers now? How do they get the infrastructures in place? How do they get the financial conditions right so it's attractive and rewarding these people so they can actually do the work and add value? And I think you're doing some great work in there at government level, and certainly things that I'm learning from when you're talking to me around this. I think when you put together what's needed at that level plus organization level, see there's actually a lot of commonality there, and there's a lot of sharing that can happen. So as organizations move into this, they must work with the authorities within the countries that they are to lobby around having the right conditions.
Absolutely.
And the new rules and regulations around employee law, for example, employment law, HR law, to cope with a potentially international, dispersed, non-permanent as well as permanent workforce.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a real problem, and I know since the pandemic we've gotten a lot of calls with regards to, okay, what do we do now within this context, especially where you're managing more geographically dispersed and you have to think about tax laws and so forth. And I mean, we released that paper in February 2020. We could never have predicted what would have happened 3 weeks later to really accelerate this process. So it's very much an interesting sort of scenario. And I know a lot of companies are now also thinking about what support they can pull in this area. So I think you touched on a good point where you mentioned what local support or what should be happening at the local level in order to facilitate this. Because I do think governments have a role to play in terms of having the right conditions and regulations there. But also there needs to be a partnership between the two in terms of companies need to be speaking to institutions in the country. They also need to be speaking to their internal and external stakeholders as well. So what would you recommend in terms of a company who's trying to embrace this digital culture? In what way can, let's say, institutions within their environments, whether it's governmental or otherwise, support that?
Well, it goes back to mindset, actually. And that's at ministerial level, it's at institutional level, it's at organizational level. Those people in charge need to have the understanding of this brave new world that we've already entered, but some are still hesitant to cross over into even now.
Absolutely.
And I include boards, executive boards on this, and particularly non-executive directors, in fact, because many non-executive directors' role is to drive advice and governance based on how the organization is going to move forward. But if they're not knowledgeable about the impact of digital transformation, whole business transformation, the way that the workforce is evolving, as we've talked about here, and the implications of that on governance, on law, on how we can do it. Because essentially now an organization that might have been very local and hiring within a 30-kilometer radius can now hire globally.
Yeah, anywhere.
And suddenly it's changed. So it is a real mindset shift. And that mindset shift leads to an acknowledgement of capability gaps. And if there's a skills gap, then leadership, government, ministers need to unlearn how we used to do things in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
And relearn what a 21st century outlook looks like. That's where it's got to start. Yeah,
so it's really a mixture of not just upskilling, but reskilling as well. How do you now transform or change what you used to do it in a way that is more applicable to the environment? What would you say to countries? Because you know, in the news, you would have seen a lot of countries now, because of COVID, the tourism really suffered. So now they're trying different things. and they're trying to provide a more accommodating infrastructure and certain welcome stamps and so forth in order to attract remote workers like yourself. And you know, of course, I'm from Barbados, and Barbados has just issued a welcome stamp for 1 year, a welcome visa stamp, which allows people to work there internationally, remote workers to work for a year. So what would you say to countries that are now trying to, let's say, attract remote workers? What should they be really looking at? What do you really look for in that sense?
Well, first of all, I need to book my ticket clearly
to
Barbados.
You will love it. Yeah. Well, I'm biased.
And I think it's a good model, and they're also learning from what's happening around the world. So there's countries like Sri Lanka are doing the same.
Yes, exactly.
Singapore had done that many years ago.
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, the Balkans, Slovenia is a really great model of this.
Yeah.
Whereby they've not only had a thriving tourist industry, but they realized that they've got something here which could be very beneficial for their economy on top of the tourism that they had, to build on it. And so I think it's a very good model for countries who are looking for it, where they might have been a tourist destination but are now looking to be a business destination, either for individuals or for companies. So they put at governmental level a lot in place in terms of learning, so they could learn what needed to do. They went and did a lot of visits around the world to economies that had already done this. They set up the tax infrastructure, the corporation tax, for example, and incentives to base companies there and use Slovenian resource and upskill in sort of technology, for example, to make it a real hub, not just for business, but for capability.
Absolutely.
And that's really important. So as well as attracting digital nomads and companies who are more nomadic, it's also investing in the local population to give them the skills to be that skilled workforce that these companies can outsource to.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Thank you so much. I think Barbados is very lucky in this sense, where there's the education is a very high level, so that also makes it very attractive. You have a highly skilled working population there, which is great for collaboration. When remote workers are coming in, you can get that exchange of knowledge. So that in itself is, like you said, that can also be an attraction. So thank you so much. That was amazing. And I really like how you contextualized it, the examples that you provided, your experience. And you say you admire my work. I mean, you are my role model in this area. I mean, we've done work together and I've seen your brilliance. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sharing all of this with us. So final question for you. You've provided a good taste or a good session, a really informative session on embracing a digital culture. You've given advice to governments. You've provided advice for businesses in terms of changing that mindset from digital transformation really to looking at business transformation. Now, we want to before we end our series off, we want to know a bit about your experience. You're a remote worker extraordinaire. So we're going to be finishing each episode with each guest their funniest travel story. So what can you tell us? What was your funniest travel story? What happened to you in all of this experience that you've had?
Well, let me just tell you, it's funny now.
That's how it always works.
but the end of the story is me at Detroit Airport being marched back onto a plane I'd just come off on by 2 armed guards and being sent back to the UK.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I feel like
I don't know if I told you this.
We have enough time. I need to hear the beginning of this story.
Really? Well, it was way back in 2004, and it was George W. Bush, I believe, at the time. So Homeland Security had been given a lot of power. It was post 9/11, of course. It's still quite fresh in the memory. And it was quite difficult, to get through customs in the US. I mean, it's kind of like it is now again, actually, to get through customs. So I went through, I got to Detroit, got through immigration okay, and then picked up my bags and I got to customs and there was a border guard. Now, you know me and I'm not the tallest person in the world, right? Okay. It's not funny. Yeah. But this guy was below me here and looked like the actor Rod Steiger. Look him up on Google. Yeah. And anyway, he said, "What's your, give me your passport." And then it's like, oh, here we go. So my passport had stamps from Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, China at the time as well, and so on, because I've been there. And then lots of questions about why have I gone here and what have you, and what are you doing here? I said, I'm just, it's some training I'm doing for coming here. He said, oh, so you're here to take jobs off Americans.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And then, when your stomach drops, it's like, So then, to cut the long story short, I was marched off to the detention block, had a 2.5 hour interview, and told in no uncertain terms I was not welcome in this country. I was going to be sent back. You're not giving valid reasons why you're in this other countries as well. We don't believe you. We're sending you home.
Whoa.
And 4 hours later, I was marched onto the same plane back. And they had stopped all of the other passengers going on. And here's me with 2 armed guards. And to me, at the time, they looked like they were both 7 foot tall with, automatic weapons marching me onto the plane as if, it's me, Rochelle, right? And then, one of the funny moments that I can remember now I can look back at it funny is the person who then, as they started boarding the rest of the plane, the person who then came down and suddenly realized that they were sitting next to me, and the look on their face as they went kind of white as a sheet, like a ghost.
Oh my God.
And I said something like, oh, don't worry, I haven't done anything wrong. When you protest too much, and kind of made them feel worse. But anyway, it took me about a year to fight this, and then to realize that I was one of among thousands of British business people that had been sent back. And they were, and I was told at the end, well, actually, we have quashed this. It was wrong. They were in the wrong. However, because you've now been refused, you now forever will need a visa to come to the US. So ever since, I've needed a visa. And you know what? The postscript to the story is that every time I go now, the question is, why do you need a visa? Oh, back in 2004, I was down in the detention. Oh, tell me more. Come with us, please. And so after I have to go through that, and I forget it all. And it's like, oh no, that didn't happen. And then you're going through the whole nightmare again. So, yeah.
Oh, geez.
So there you go. There you go.
I like to call those stories for the grandkids. They're that good. That's brilliant.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, I know. I think that may
terrifying at the time.
At the time I was. It was just like, what the heck's going to happen here? Because there were people being interviewed like me and being taken away because they were protesting. In fact, there's a point I was saying, hang on a minute, just like this, hang on a minute. I've been doing this. Look, I was here just a few weeks ago doing the same thing for the same company. Yeah. And I started raising my voice a little bit, and literally the guy stood back and his hand went down like this, said, "You need to calm down, sir."
Whoa.
Like, whoa. I was like, come on, really?
Well,
really?
Anyone who knows that you're not a threat at all. And that is one of those double.
Thank you very much, I think. Yes.
It's like a thanks, I think. But anyhow, thank you so much, Jeremy. It was lovely to have you. Lovely for you for sharing your stories with us and for sharing your expertise. And I hope that as remote working becomes the new normal. I'm against that word, the new normal, but I'm going to use it here. That a lot of those issues become less and less. I really hope that people don't have, that those issues aren't as prevalent. Safety is important, but less hope is being enforced. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for sharing. And thank you to our audience for listening to us and for joining us for our first session of Remotely Speaking. Join us for our other upcoming session, which we'll talk more about how companies and how countries embrace a digital culture. But we'll look at, in particularly, our focus will be on remote leadership and what that looks like across different regions. So thank you so much again for joining us, everyone. Thank you for listening. And this is Remotely Speaking. Thank you, Jeremy. Take care.
Thanks very much.